Hey, welcome back to Vintage Super League. I'm Reed Duke here with David Williams. Dave, how's it going?
It's going all right. Going pretty good, I guess.
Cool deck you showed up with. Both games you got to draw a ton of cards, but by the end of the game just did not really have a reasonable mix of lands
or counters,
disruption, or threats. But that is a sweet deck. In game one, it almost seemed like you had a more impressive combo deck than Menendian.
Yeah, it would have been nice to hit some lands or Force of Will or Spell Pierce or anything really, but sometimes it goes that way.
Yeah.
So that's magic.
Yeah, that's right. How did you come up with this one?
Me and Paul were sitting around in New York before Jamie's wedding last week, and Paul started talking about I think Deep-Root Champion is what started it off. And we kind of brewed up his deck together, mostly him. I gave some input. And we kind of went different directions. He had white in his deck and wasn't big on regrowth and forgot about Mana Gorge or Hydra. And playing his deck, realized that a creature blocking kind of was annoying and thought about adding a Berserk to give it trample. And then we realized there's so many mental missteps, and Berserk's not necessary if you just play Mana Gorge or Hydra. So I took the white out of mine and added some Hydras and another regrowth because I love regrowth. And it started as a different deck, but it became a creature deck, and just wanted to have fun.
Yeah, it looks cool. I appreciate mix of new and old cards here, with actually a lot of Ixalan cards, Deep-Root Champion and that Perilous Voyage.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to, it's rare that the new sets get a lot of showcasing in Vintage. So, since I was 0-3, I said, you know what, might as well just have some fun and make a fun deck, see what happens.
Yeah, you got Barall and Talrand as
all just kind of it's like an anti-sphere, and seems pretty sweet if you're chaining regrowths, make them cheaper.
Yeah, the looting ability surely comes up, every once in a while for this deck too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, that was a bonus too, not just making stuff cheaper.
All right.
I was pretty happy with it. I played some matches with it and won. And I don't know. I went skimpy on my sideboard, so I think you'll probably beat me too. I only have 5 cards. Usually I have 8 or something like that against Shop, so it could be tough.
Yeah, we'll see how that winds up later in the night. In the meantime, we're gonna watch Steve against Kevin. This is Ad Nauseam Tendrils against Blue-White Control with Spell Queller. You got any instincts for how this is going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, Duress is pretty huge because it can just, it doesn't get Spell Queller, but that doesn't get Ad Nauseam. I mean, it doesn't really stop Tendrils either. So I think it's going to go in Steve's favor. I don't think Kevin can pressure him fast enough to stop what Steve's trying to do.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that assessment. The Storm decks they're really well prepared to beat people that only have counter spells. It's more like the people that have a mix of counter spells, discard, permanent based disruption. You really need to attack from a lot of different angles at once to have a great matchup against Storm. And unclear, to what extent Kevin's deck can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at his sideboard here too to see what he can even switch into. Does he have anything like his Mindbreak Trap? He has 1. Doesn't really have much that deals with it. Like Stony Silence can shut down. I saw brought in Null Rods, which isn't even that great against a ritual-based deck. So there's not really much you can do with it. Except maybe like a lab, Arcane Lab, or what's the creature, the Arcane Lab creature guy. So I don't see any of that. So yeah, I think it looks.
Aethersworn Canonist, yeah.
I think it looks pretty bad for Kevin, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. He's certainly got some tools, and if the draws just line up great for him, he can win. But statistically, I would pick Steve as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's got main deck of Flusterstorm and 4 Force of Wills, and that's it. And then he can bring in another Force Fluster and a Mindbreak Trap. Oh, he's got a Mindbreak Trap in the main. So he's got a little bit of game. I mean, if he has his cards in the right order, but the problem is all those duresses. He's going to really have to hope that he has the missteps for the duresses, or perhaps can brainstorm and hide cards and things like that from the disruption of Steve.
So, hey, having played a good range of vintage combo decks yourself, what do you think of this ad nauseum take on Storm combo?
It's cool. It stops what's popular, which is what Leovold and Ocean Thief with ad nauseum, because you're not drawing the card. So I definitely see where he's coming from with that. It is a little rough to play ad nauseum with 4 ad nauseums and multiple tendrils in your deck, as you saw in the first game against me. Steve almost killed himself. Mm-hmm. So it is a little tough. And it's not easy to resolve a 5-mana spell, especially because he doesn't have Force of Will. So he's all in on the Duress plan pretty much here to try to get one of those through. So it's not easy what he's trying to do, but when everybody's playing all these creature decks, it makes it a lot easier for him.
Yeah, that's a great point. We had started to touch on the pros and cons of ad nauseum versus Yawgmoth's Bargain or Paradoxical Outcome, whatever it might be. But I think you made the best point so far, which is getting through Leovold, Notion Thief, Spirit of the Labyrinth.
I didn't see he has 4 packs, so he doesn't have Forceful, but he does have Pact. But I mean, again, Pact is kind of risky because that's it. That's your turn to win, pretty much right there. I mean, you saw against he had to ad nause and then untap and go at it again. So if you have to, you can't really Pact and take another turn. So he definitely made it harder than other Storm combo decks would have, but he has certain advantages with ad nauseum. So, usually in these ad nauseum decks, you see 1, they can tutor for it, and they don't have to worry about taking 5 from the future, from flipping ad nauseum cards. So,
okay, players are ready, so let's cut down to the match. Hello, Reed Duke and David Williams here, bringing you match number 3 of Vintage Super League. Kevin Cron with blue-white Spell Queller. He's already mulliganed to 6 here. Looks like he found a good 6.
He found a good 6, and again, this is like Steve's hand doesn't have enough card draw other than ad nauseum, so he gets these hands. Like, look at this hand. It's just a bunch of mana, and it's an Imperial Seal, which isn't even that great. What are you going to seal for? I guess he could seal for ad nauseum because he does have Ritual Lotus Petal Pearl, but it's just tough. One of these cards gets countered, and what's he got left? He's just praying. He's off the top of his deck. So he's going to cast Duress here. Looks like Kevin's going to Force Will. Yeah, Treasure Cruise doesn't have a lot of utility early in the game, so it's an easy discard. He's got Ancestral when he gets to keep Gataxian Probe and Preordain, 2 other cards he can cast early.
The Imperial Seal and the Lotus Petal a bit inconvenient together, as Steve's going to need the Lotus Petal to get up to 5 mana for ad nauseum, but that means waiting a turn to cast the Imperial Seal, which means waiting another turn to cast the ad nauseum. So it will work, but he's given Kevin a lot of time to set up, and with Ancestral Recall, that's exactly what Kevin needs.
Yeah, no, I'd like to see Kevin probe here first before Ancestral. It's just good bait for Misstep, and he gets to see what he's up against, and he might draw a Misstep of his own off of it.
Yeah, now he'll see the Misstep in Steve's hand, assuming Steve doesn't take the bait. Then I guess he'll likely play Preordain instead of Ancestral.
Yeah, I think so. It makes sense. So he's going to look at his hand here. Steve let it resolve. Draws another island. Not that exciting. So I think you got to Preordain here.
I think Steve is right to be patient with the Misstep, because he's got to think with Imperial Seal as his only action card, he might need to counter Kevin's Misstep.
Right, yeah. Kevin really wants to find his own Misstep, really. And JVP kind of amplifies what I was saying earlier. It's just not really that great of a card against ad nauseum tendrils. I guess he could play it, and next turn it's going to flip, and he can get his Ancestral on again, but it still takes a while before he even gets to get a lot of value out of it, and he has to tap 2 mana in his main phase to basically do nothing for that turn.
All right, crunch time. Both these players know roughly what the other is dealing with, and they also know that next turn is going to be the big fight. So Kevin's going to do everything he can to try to find Force of Will this turn.
Now, a second misstep is kind of like some backup, but what's interesting is, Steve's life total is a huge resource for his ad nauseum. He's already at 18. He's going to go to 16 from the first one, and as we've seen before, he has 4 ad nauseums in his deck, so he could just die to the ad nauseums.
Great point.
I'm not sure about Kevin waiting on this Ancestral because it is going to pump the Storm count up by 2.
There's also some combinations of cards he could have found, like he could have found a Mox and a Stony Silence or something like that, where he could regret not main phasing it.
Yeah, I would have liked to see Ancestral on his own turn because now, Storm count, especially when you're ad nausuming, when your life is low, every Storm count is huge for you to not have to find an extra card, an extra spell to play.
Yeah. I guess Kevin must have figured just it's going to get mental misstepped one way or the other. So I'm trying to think if there's any value in holding up Hurkyl's Recall. Doesn't seem like it.
So we see 2 Moxes in Steve's hand, so he does have 2 mana available. We're going to need to see, he really wants a Lotus with that Yagwell, a Lotus and a Dark Ritual, and he's off to the races, but he's at 7. He can, the most expensive card in his deck is 5, so he can give it one more go if he wants. But then if he goes to 2, he can't Vamp Tutor if he needs to find the Tendrils. So he ends up stopping at 7, so the other cards he has in his hand must be pretty good.
Yeah, the play pattern here is going to be, 2 life to Tutor, 2 life to Gitaxian Probe and draw it, so he doesn't want to risk.
Right, with the Probe, that's 4 life. And looks like there's a Dark Ritual in his graveyard and a Lotus Petal, so he could actually go get Black Lotus, pay 2 life to get it, replay it. That's 3 plus the plus the Sapphire's 4. 1 floating, Yogg will play them back for 4 more to have 5, Dark Ritual, but he still would not have the Tendrils.
And then he can try to do the Tutor Probe move again, but at that point he'll be so low on life that he'd have to pay blue mana for the Probe.
Yeah, he'll have the blue mana, and he's at 7, so he can actually do it, right? Vamp Tutor is 2, Probe is 2, and the second Vamp Tutor is 2, so he would go down to 1. So the question is, how much mana does that take? So it takes 1 to start it, because the Probe can use life, and then the casting will leave him 1 floating. Lotus Petal and Black Lotus puts him back up to 5. Dark Ritual puts him at 7. Yep. Cast the Vamp Tutor Probe, puts him at 5. Tendrils puts him at 1. So he can actually do it. Storm count is already 7. He only needs to get it to 8, so it'll easily be enough. So he just basically has to hope there's no counterspell in Kevin's hand, and based on the way Kevin's played this game, it's unlikely.
Yeah, but you know what he can't do with this line of play is he can't cast Mental Misstep for life. So, oh wow, so he's using mana on the Probe here.
Yeah, so this is pretty sweet by throwing the Ancestral in here, though. It's kind of throws off the math I was just describing, because what I described left him at 1. So by doing this, I don't think he can do the line I described. He did have a mana left over, so possibly he can. He just needs to oh no, the Vamp Tutor puts him at 1. Yeah, he can still do it.
Yeah, so
he just won't have that 1 mana left over, but at the end of my sequence, he had a mana, so it still works out.
Lotus Ritual is 5 black mana for a Tutor and a Tendrils, and then the Lotus Petal gives him the blue mana to flashback the Probe. So everything is just exactly what he needs. Couldn't spare a mana, couldn't spare a life, but it seems like Steve Menendian is going to win this game.
Yep, as long as he sees the line. I'm not sure what he's waiting on. Go ahead and play your Mox and your, yeah, there you go, and your Lotus and your Petal. Here we go. 5 mana. Now he didn't leave himself any blue. Oh, he hadn't played the Petal yet. All right. So that's the Probe right there. So it's actually the perfect life and mana here. It's all coming up Steve in this game. And he already saw his hand from the prior probe, so he knows that the coast is clear. Storm count's already at 17.
There it is.
Drain you for 38. 36. All right. So it went about as predicted, as I thought, just things like JVP just aren't really kind of where you want to be. I mean, I don't think you want to be on a Deep Root Champion either against Ad Nauseam. So Steve made a pretty wise choice. I mean, I think where he might have some trouble is against your deck with Spear of Resistance and things of the sort, Chalice of the Void. You have a Trinisphere in your deck too?
I do.
Yeah, so he's likely going to have a tough matchup against you. But here in the sideboard, I'm not sure what Kevin can really even bring in other than that one Flusterstorm and the Mindbreak Trap. I think that's pretty much all he has. He still keeps the Swords to Plowshares in. He does know Steve has Xanthid Swarms, which you got to get rid of if you're trying to play to protect yourself with counter game. Mm-hmm. Steve is a huge fan of Xanthid Swarm for as long as I've known him. I mean, I think I met Steve first back in 2005, and he was playing it back then.
Yeah, so I guess neither player changing all that much. The Xanthid Swarms being the big change in the matchup, but I mean, perhaps their biggest impact is just forcing Kevin to keep in these awful cards, which Swords to Plowshares is going to do nothing if Steve doesn't draw the Xanthid Swarm.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal against the combo deck to have these very specific reactive cards like Swords to Plowshare that, if you draw, look, Steve doesn't even have the Xanthid Swarms in, which is kind of brutal.
Wow. That's going to be, that is like a big win for Steve if he actually doesn't bring in the Xanthid Swarms and Kevin keeps in all 4 Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah, I mean, what else, what else can Kevin do? He took out Treasure Cruise. I guess he feels he doesn't have time for that, and he took out Top for the same reasons for the Mindbreak Trap. But
I love it. I love watching this stuff because I know these two players have known each other, played together for so many years. Steve might just kind of like have Kevin's number on this one particular thing. He might be able to so accurately predict the way he's going to sideboard that Steve doesn't even need to bring in the Swarms.
Yep, so Steve takes out Extirpate. Looks like he had temporarily brought that in but decided against it. It's kind of interesting, though, if you're not going to bring in the Xanthid Swarms, most decks nowadays playing counterspells are playing Swords to Plowshares already. You know what I mean? How often are you going to want to bring them in then if you're not bringing them in this matchup? Maybe, like Land still plays them usually because I guess if you're playing a blue-red version, but those decks play bolts. So it's like, what decks are you bringing the Xanthid Swarms in if you're not bringing them in here?
Well, maybe it's just a case of the value of getting to actually write that on your deck list when we're sharing deck lists with each other is enough for Steve. I mean, he could, submit his deck lists and not even put them in his deck box when he shows up to the tournament, and they're still going to give him some value based on his opponents panicking and keeping in these creature removal spells.
Now, this hand is monstrous for Kevin. He's got Force of Will with a blue card, a Snapcaster if he wants, a Misstep, and a Mindbreak Trap.
Yeah, just what he wants.
So we can misstep this Duress, and then Steve's pretty much, that's all he's got going on.
Yeah, and this is where the control deck beats the Storm deck. When the Storm deck draws its Tendrils, which is a brick, draws a Vampiric Tutor, multiple Chrome Moxes. These are all card disadvantage cards. So when the control deck is able to successfully 1-for-1 and the Storm deck draws too many spells like this, it's it could be a massacre. What Kevin really needs is something to get him ahead on resources, like an Ancestral would be perfect, of course, but a Dig Through Time, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, something like that.
Yeah, he took the treasure cruise out and kept in a swords to plowshares.
I like that both players are being patient here.
Yeah, Steve's up to 7 cards, so if he does draw an 8th and it's not a land, I wonder if he's just going to Vamp Tutor or if he's even just going to Chrome Mox or
one strategy that's open to Steve if he puts Kevin on specifically Force of Wills rather than Flusterstorm and Mindbreak Trap is you could just wait, save up a big hand, and then go cast all my spells, Chain of Vapor my own Mox, and try to Tendrils you just the old-fashioned way.
So he's turning his Lotus into a Preordain and getting a threat on the board. I think he realizes you can't just let Steve sculpt the hand. You do have to start applying some pressure.
And that's one thing about ad nauseum is you don't have to actually get them dead, but if you can just deal 6 or 8 damage, that does reduce their chances of being able to successfully combo. So Snapcaster, a pretty reasonable threat in that regard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Tutor here. He could Snapcaster and Mental Misstep it if he chooses to, which might be kind of sweet. You get 2 Snapcasters on the board. You still have Force of Will if you need it, pitching Flusterstorm when you're tapped out, and you got Mindbreak Trap if it gets to that. And unlikely you have to do that and you get to untap, but it looks like he's just going to let him and misstep this, which is correct, assuming he was getting Ancestral, but he's not always going to get Ancestral there when he Vamp Tutors. But this is going to work out great. Because he's going to misstep with Life, I imagine, and then when Steven missteps back, he can Flusterstorm that misstep, which puts Steven down to 16, and then he has 4 points of damage attacking the following turn, which will put Steven to 12.
Yeah.
Goes the Flusterstorm. The storm count is 5, 6, 7. Oh, wow. Can Steve just win? Oh, no, Mindbreak Trap. Wow, because Steve could play Chrome Mox, Tendrils, and that's 16.
Wow, we might see him do that.
Steve, like, if he's not up against Force of Will, well, actually, Force of Will would put him to 2, which, although you can't really go all in and put your opponent to 2 because you can't finish him off. So basically, Steve knows that if he's up against no counter spell, no pitch counter, he can win the game right here.
Well, if it's Force of Will, 8 points, eight copies of Tendrils.
No, right, he goes to 14. It literally has to be Mindbreak Trap.
Steve didn't do it, though. Wow.
I don't think he may not have seen it because I didn't see it right away. It took me a minute. I was looking at the storm count, like, wait a minute, 5, 6, 7. There you go. Mindbreak Trap is a big game here.
It's gonna, wind up working out better for Steve that he didn't go for it, but that I think would have been a great play.
Yeah, I think it's likely he just didn't see it. I mean, it's not something like at that point of the game you think, oh wait, I have a Tendrils to just kill my opponent, because I imagine he would have gone for it, knowing that Force of Will would put your opponent to 14 and you still have him dead, knowing that you only lose to Mindbreak Trap and there's 2 in the deck. I imagine he would have gone for it because it's unlikely getting any better as we sit here. Because if he has that counter, right, he's going to have it already. So Steve's just going to go for the baby Tendrils, try to get some life back. And that's going to go ahead and bait this out. And we'll leave Kevin with Force of Will and a blue card, which happens to be Spell Queller up for the following turn. So
don't know that I necessarily would have countered the Tendrils. Kevin must think that just by the time he gets Steve to 8 or 4 life, it's the ad nauseum just doesn't do enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you allow him the Tendrils there, I guess it was only for 6 life, but his thinking may have been it allows him more time, another turn or 2. So I see someone in the chat ask, can he win with Tendrils exiled? He does play 2 Tendrils.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and strip his 5th mana source, put him at 4. So I can't even imagine an ad nauseum that would allow him to get out of this, even if Kevin did not have the proper answer to it. And I think Steve's just looking to see maybe how he sideboarded and then going to concede here, because going down to 2, nothing really you can do here.
Yeah. We got a game 3.
2 good games. Kevin had the cards come up in the way he needed to win that game, but as you saw, I mean, he needed every resource at every time, and he happened to have the Mindbreak Trap where he would have lost that turn after that monstrous start.
Now, I'm very eager to see if either player changes their Xanthan Swarm Swords to Plowshares configuration.
I doubt it, because Kevin doesn't know that he didn't bring in the Swarms, and Steven saw his hand with the probe and saw a Swords to Plowshares, so he knows he has the Swords in his hand. So I imagine both players standing pat here.
Yeah. If I was Steve, I would bring back the Time Twister when I'm on the play. It's just, too much value to leave on the table if you have one of those Mox Time Twister hands on the play. First turn Time
Twister is probably my favorite thing to do in Vintage. It's just,
it's the best.
It's so sweet. I always love to ask my opponent after we draw our new hand, are you keeping? Oh, wait, you don't get that option anymore with this hand. So here we go. Steven's on the play, which is also huge for his deck. Duress is just such a more powerful card on the play.
Oh wow! So this is just a classic Menendian hand. I love it. I love the number of options available to him. I used to read Steve's old articles where he'd describe every possible line of play, and would write 25,000 words about the first 2 turns of a Vintage game. This is definitely a hand where you can go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, I mean, it would be sweet if he had a counter or a duress. He could set up a spot for Time Twister next turn, like Mystical Tutor for Time Twister, play out all his lands, duress him, and take his hand. Start a new game, but unfortunately for him, Kevin's going to be able to deploy lots of his own cards and threats anyways.
Huh. Yeah. Steve's actually if he hypothetically could get Kevin to fight a counter battle over something like misstep back, or have Kevin cast a Force of Will, he's almost could get to enough Storm on turn 1 to Tendrils him out. I think what's going to happen here is there's going to be a fight. Maybe Steve tutors for a threatening card, Kevin Force of Wills, and then Kevin's not going to be left with much. He did draw Brainstorm, which is great here.
Yeah, especially also get 2 fetch lands.
A bit inconvenient for Steve that he drew 2 Moxes that don't produce blue or black mana, as he would love to be able to maybe cast a Misstep and a Tutor in this turn.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It wasn't perfect for him. So he brainstormed, but he kept Swords to Plowshares in his hand.
I think actually the Brainstorm got misstepped, and then it was a blunder that he was resolving there.
There we go. I missed it. I had him in the wrong order. Thank you.
All right, Steve thinking in his upkeep.
Now he's vamping first, I think. So if it gets misstepped, his mystical doesn't cost him any life. He's baiting, with the one that is detrimental to his cause. He's going to force a will it.
Wow, that was a strange sequence. A
Yeah.
little bit odd that Kevin would force of will the tutor, giving up on his only action card. Though he may have stacked the preordain, I guess, with the ponder. But also, Steve knew he had two pretty bad cards on the top of his library. I would have thought maybe he would go for the mystical tutor still in his upkeep after the vamp got countered.
Just to shuffle away that Chromox.
Right. Yeah, Chromox just the worst draw in his deck at this point.
So we've got Mindbreak Trap and a useless Swords.
He does have enough to hard cast the Mindbreak Trap, which I think we could very easily see this turn. What do you think he would go for with Mystical Tutor here?
I mean, I think the obvious answer is usually just Ancestral, right? But
yeah, I think so.
Doesn't have a 5th mana for Ad Nauseam. If he wants to cast it now, having the Chromox, he doesn't have anything to imprint on it if he wants to cast that. So this is going to get out a Mindbreak Trap and crack the Lotus, and it's going to leave both players basically with nothing. It's going to leave Kevin with 3 mana and a Swords, and it's going to leave Steven with 4 mana and a Mox. So it's basically whoever's draws are better from this point on, which favors Steven because he has more cards that are just impactful on their own right away, whereas Kevin has things like Swords to Plowshares and random counter spells that might not fit the need.
Oh man, that's that's probably the best draw in Kevin's deck there.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's, Ancestral's 3 cards, but this is 2 of your choice. For just 1 more mana. Ooh, he's found Ancestral and Spell Queller.
Couple good ones.
And a Force of Will and a Snapcaster. It's all coming up Kevin. Steven continues to brick out.
So that is his 5th mana. So hypothetically, if he was to draw, 2 Ad Nauseams back to back, he could make something happen here.
Yeah, that's about what it's going to take. Here goes Snapcaster on Ancestral. And he gets to leave up Spell Queller and Force of Will. Or no, if he draws a land here, he does. Or Mox. Can't really think of any sequences that get Steven out of this.
Another bad draw for Steven. It's looking like Kevin Cron's going to be off to a quick 2-0 start tonight.
Yeah, and I don't know how I fare against his deck either. I think it looks good for him. Spell Quellers and Swords to Plowshares seem pretty good against me. So Pumpkin Spice. Join it. Go ahead and get out the fast clock. Still keeping up Force of Will, knowing now he gets to see that he's not up against anything.
Yeah, I have to imagine the second Force of Will mathematically eliminates Steve, so long as Kevin doesn't do anything crazy.
Steve is at 17, and we've got 5 coming here now. Nothing he can cast. I mean, he theoretically Could he plow his guy and then force his plow to try to? He could plow, force. Both his guys +4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Wouldn't have been enough. No reason to do that, but he can definitely do it next turn after he counters this ad nauseum.
Kevin's going to hard cast the force, keeping 1 still available to him.
Yeah, and if on his own turn, all he has to do is force his own plow, and he would easily have enough for lethal that turn. He doesn't even have to do that. He knows his opponent has nothing with 2 counters in his hand. But quick 2-0 for Kevin, who normally I would think is an underdog in this match, but he showed me.
Yeah, so on the evening, that leaves Kevin at 2-0, Steve at 1-1, and you and I, Dave, still fighting for our first win.
Yeah, I'm excited. This should be a fun match. The person on the right has won every match so far, so hopefully the trend continues. And that was good. That was a good match. It's good to see some new blood, some new decks. I'm pretty happy with the restrictions from the last go round with Mentor and Thorn of Amethyst.
Yeah, I think it's great. Just, I mean, Kevin's deck and your deck are 2 great examples of what happens when you restrict Mentor. You force people to actually play with, fair cards or make a creative take on how you're going to win the game instead of just having this card that's clearly better than everything.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, it's going to be me against Dave.
See you soon.
Need the latest Magic the Gathering singles for Constructed, casual cards for the kitchen table, or sealed product for a draft night with your friends? CoolStuffInc.com has what you're looking for, with an extensive selection